all the other things. So th thanks for the opportunity to visit with you remotely today. Uh, I'd like to just give an overview a bit of our breeding program and some of the new cultivars. And then we've been doing a lot of harvesting and processing at the farm. So I have some information, some videos to share, and hopefully the videos come through okay to show some of the equipment. And as growers are starting to, well, for one, have planted some hazelnut trees, and now they're starting to come into production. A lot of the thoughts are on, well, how are we going to harvest these nuts, and what are the steps involved with processing them? And we've been doing this for quite a few years here at Rutgers, and we've been able to build a collection of lots of different pieces of equipment. So I want to sort of share with you today an update on the cultivars, the plants coming out of the breeding program, and what to look forward to, and then also we'll sort of switch gears and talk about some of the steps involved with what to do with the nuts now that you're producing nuts. Because I know some of our growers and some, including in Pennsylvania, are just nearing hazelnut production on their farms. So I'm going to share my screen now, and then hopefully everything works as planned, and we can move along.
What could possibly go wrong?
Okay, so like I said, the things I'm going to talk about today are the Rutgers cultivars, the ones that are currently available, and then we do have some new releases in the pipeline. And I know that Don from Foggy Bottom is there, so he does have some of the inside information. If you want to talk to him a little bit later about some of the cultivars and the new cultivars and the timelines involved there. And then, like I said, we'll talk about harvesting and processing. And then hopefully, if I keep on time, we'll have 10 or 15 minutes for questions, if anybody has some questions or things we want to discuss. So a little bit about the breeding program. Maybe some of you we've met before. It's kind of hard to tell who's actually at the meeting, but or I've seen some of my presentations, maybe at the Northern Nut Growers Association. But we've been running the Rutgers Hazelnut Research and Breeding Program for over just about 30 years now. The first trees were planted in 1996. So we've been really focused on hazelnuts for almost 3 decades. And I was really fortunate uh, to be part of the very beginning of this project uh, as an undergraduate student. So I've been really working on hazelnuts and other nut trees for really a majority of my life, my adult life. So the new cultivar development process is really a 17 to 20 year process or a program. It's really long term. It takes quite a bit of time and quite a bit of effort. And within the breeding program, of course, we have our main objectives. And if you've been growing hazelnuts or considering growing hazelnuts, I'm sure you've come across or are familiar with Eastern filbert blight. So this is really the main focus of the program. Of course, developing plants that are EFB resistant, but it's not just being resistant, it's understanding where that resistance comes from so we can have plants with what we would call durable resistance or long-lived resistance. These are plants we expect to be in the landscape for 30, 40, 50 years, maybe longer. So we have to be really careful in considering what type of resistance we have because, of course, as you all know, it's like a battle in nature where the pathogen is trying to overcome the resistance in the host, and that's going to happen year after year after year. And if you're not careful with the type of resistance you have, at some point it's going to break down. That's just how these things work. And if you're expecting to have a hazelnut orchard in the ground for decades, that presents a problem. So a lot of our research, our academic research, is really focused on trying to understand the Eastern filbert blight pathogen, the fungus Anisogramma anomala, and then also better understand the hazelnut in terms of how does it resist this pathogen, and then develop cultivars that we expect or hope to have long-term, long-lived resistance. Then on top of that, we really want to have a high-quality product. So we're really focused on high-quality kernels. This way we can access the world hazelnut market. We really want to have a premium product here in the Eastern United States. So with the breeding program, not only can we select for resistance to this pathogen, and I can talk for an hour just on that alone. But within those big plant populations, we can select for really high quality kernels. So these would be medium to large size, round kernels. These are ones that when you roast them, they blanch well, meaning that skin comes off. We want thin shells or a higher percent kernel. Uh, you think about when you're harvesting hazelnuts from the field, if you have 1 ton of nuts and you have a really low kernel percentage, you're getting, you may have 55 to 60% of that weight could be just shell. So the thinner the shells, the higher kernel percent, the better in terms of what you can pull off of the field. And of course, few defects, less molds, less shriveled kernels, less twin kernels, things like that. And then moving down a hierarchy, focused on high yields. Of course, we want the highest yielding trees we can have. Precocious trees, meaning ones that come into production early, so we don't have to wait for the crop. And then hazelnuts, like a lot of our nut trees, can go into biannual bearing, where you have 1 year with a really heavy crop, and then the next year with a low crop. And I'm sure if you've grown hickories, you see this quite common. Black walnuts, our oaks, hazelnuts can do this too. But through breeding, because this is a domesticated species, especially if we consider the European hazelnut, we can really get away from that or reduce that. So that's part of the breeding program. And then I'll get to this a little bit as we talk about new cultivars, but we also really want to look for diverse incompatibility alleles, S alleles. So hazelnuts are self-incompatible, meaning that, of course, it's not going to cross with itself. And then within the orchard, you need multiple cultivars, unrelated cultivars that are cross-compatible. So from the breeding perspective, we want to really select plants that can intercross in many different directions. And then also blooming, there's a timing component. So we want to make sure that the pollen is shed when the female flowers are ready for pollen. So this is a big effort, like I mentioned. It's really a numbers game. It's just how many plants can we practically manage to select through to find the needle in the haystack, to find those really amazing elite individuals within the big populations. So we do plant from 5 to 8,000 trees per year from controlled crosses. So these are seedling trees, all genetically different. And then through the stages, the process of the breeding program, we try to select down and find those really, really amazing plants within those big populations. Right now, if you visited us at Rutgers, you would see we have over 30,000 trees in the field. And from that, we want to reduce it to the plants that we'll release as cultivars. So they would really be the best selections possible. And as a cultivar, I think as most or all of you would know, these would be clonally propagated. So we're not going back to seed. We're not creating seed orchards or seed populations. We're cloning the plants. So you get that really special elite individual. Uh, in 2020, now this was after more than 20 years of effort here at Rutgers. We released 4 cultivars and then one from the Hybrid Hazelnut Consortium. These are the ones I'm going to just talk real briefly about them in case you haven't uh, had an opportunity to learn about these cultivars yet. These are the ones that are available commercially. Foggy Bottom Tree Farm, for example, has them for sale. This would include Raritan, Monmouth, Hunterdon, and Somerset. And then, of course, the hybrid hazelnut, the beast. And I'll talk a little bit about each of these because they're different. They're particular traits. Uh, you may find you prefer one over the other, things like that. So Raritan is really the one that's. I'll just get right to the punchline. Raritan is the one that is performing the best over our longer term evaluations. This is the highest yielding plant. This is really the most robust out of all of the cultivars we've released so far. This was released for what we call the blanched kernel market. So this isn't a very large in-shell nut. This is a cultivar with a medium-sized round kernel that ultimately works in the confectionery market. That means that when you roast it, the skin comes off really well. It's the right size that will go into candy bars, into the production of something like nut butters or spreads like Nutella. Uh, Raritan is protected by what we would call quantitative resistance to eastern filbert blight. This means it's not carrying a gene for immunity. It's not actually immune to eastern filbert blight. It's protected by multiple genes that gives it a very high level of tolerance. And from the plant breeding perspective, this is the type of resistance that tends to be much more long lasting. If you're protected by a single gene that gives you immunity, that works great until the pathogen evolves or mutates and is able to overcome that. And once it overcomes that, it's just one gene that's protecting the plant. And then you can see that resistance just essentially disappear or break down. Where quantitative resistance, since there's multiple genes at play, that the fungus has a harder time mutating across all those different points to overcome it. So you get this longer term, longer lasting resistance. So that's what's special about Raritan and a few of the others. The S alleles has S3 pollen. That's probably one of the things you'll want to consider. And it's really the mature trees. Now, the original Raritan is 20 years old, or it was 20 years old last year. And we harvested 73 pounds of nuts off of one individual tree. So this is a very large tree, and its mature yield potential is very high. It's the largest of the cultivars. Uh, a little bit more about the nuts. You can see the picture here. They have a really attractive dark brown, shiny shell. If you're going to sell them as in-shell nuts, they are still quite attractive. Uh, they're about 47 to 48% kernel, which is great, or good in terms of what a hazelnut can be. And they do drop clean from the husk, because these are going to, even though it's a large tree, these nuts are going to fall to the ground and make it easier to harvest using equipment, which we'll talk about from ground harvest. So just to show you Raritan, this is the original plant. It is a very large tree or large shrub. So if you're used to growing hybrid hazelnuts or seedling hybrid hazelnuts from the upper Midwest, you'll see that this is a very different architecture. It can be pruned to a single stem, and you can see here what a 6-year-old and an 8-year-old grafted tree or a layered tree of Raritan looks like. Now I will talk about Somerset. Somerset is the other, what I'll call production cultivar. This is a much smaller, more compact tree than Raritan. Again, it has a similar size kernel, and it was selected for the blanched kernel market. One challenge is it does have the same S allele, pollen allele as Raritan. So we're going to talk about diversifying your orchards. These are not going to cross, so you can't plant an orchard of just Raritan and Somerset. What is unique or useful about Somerset is it comes into production really early and it is quite compact. So this is a smaller tree. The ultimate yields are not as high as Raritan, but you could probably squeeze more Somerset trees per acre and still make up for that. And it will come into production sooner. And it has extremely thin shells. This is probably on the top end of what's possible for a hazelnut. This is about 54. Sometimes you'll see 56% kernel. So anything close to 50 is really, really quite excellent. This has extremely thin shells. Uh, it differs in terms of where the resistance comes from. So this is protected by a single resistance gene. So this is held up in our trials for many years. This is a gene that comes from a, a cultivar named Rotoli from Spain. It's different if you're familiar with the Oregon State cultivars that are protected by the gas-away resistance gene. It's a different gene on a different chromosome or different linkage group, uh, which is holding up to different strains of the fungus. But being that it is a single resistance gene, we want to incorporate it as part of a diversified orchard. It wouldn't be our main production cultivar. Trying to diversify resistance to make sure we have a more long-lived orchard. Like I mentioned, it's very precocious, and the small trees can be very high yielding. But what we found is because it can be so high yielding as a young tree, this sometimes puts extra stress on the tree. So if you're not doing good fertility management, good water and weed control, you can see Somerset will slip into a biannual bearing habit because it can essentially overproduce one year and then underproduce the next year. So what we're learning is this one takes a little bit more, it takes a little more careful hand to grow well in the orchard. Comparing it to Raritan, which is just such a much more robust production tree in terms of its size and its vigor and its ability to resist biannual bearing. What we did find with Somerset, so if any of you have grown Somerset or are growing Somerset, uh, foliar fertilization actually helps. So in the summer, when you see the nut clusters are starting to form and the nuts are expanding in size, if you use some simple complete foliar fertilizers, you can keep Somerset kind of moving along throughout the summer and not getting stressed. Otherwise, you'll see as it sets, and you can see in the picture here, this is kind of a typical production on Somerset. If you have a high crop yield like that, you'll see that the new growth that's happening while these nuts are filling is a little more yellow or peaked in color. So we found if we use foliar fertilizing during that period of time, we can kind of boost the growth that's happening and support the nut crop. Because remember, during that summer period is when the flowers are being set for next year's crop. So if your trees get stressed in June and July, not only can you impact the nut fill, but you're going to impact the production of catkins and female flowers for the next season. So you really want to be on top of managing fertility. And Somerset is where you'll probably be, if you planted some of the Rutgers cultivars, you'll be excited early on because this is where you'll get the earliest crops of trees. And like I said, it could be quite high on a small tree, but you'll have to keep in mind you're going to really need to manage the fertility. Raritan, on the other hand, is less precocious. So at the same age, you may have less nuts, but it's busy building biomass and plant resources to be able to help support the crop in later years when Raritan has a very high crop yield. Another plant, another cultivar from the Rutgers releases from a few years ago is Monmouth. Monmouth has a little bit larger nut than the other two. Unfortunately, it does cross-pollinate with both Raritan and Somerset. But in some years, the bloom is very early. Their pollen shed is very early. So we're really looking at Monmouth as our early pollinizer for Raritan and Somerset. It does have really excellent nut traits or kernel traits and would fall into the line of being for the blanched kernel market, but also works well as an in-shell nut. It cracks out really nice. It has about 50% kernel and it roasts really well and has really good blanching. It has a very high level of tolerance, so this is protected in a similar manner as Raritan with quantitative resistance. So it's not immune to Eastern filbert blight, and you may see a few cankers on occasion, but they typically don't even develop the fruiting bodies or the stromata to spread the disease. We do find, I think, because it does bloom so early, in many orchards, you may not have enough early pollen from other cultivars that the yields would be lower than Raritan and Somerset, as we're looking at these longer term trials we have in place. So we're not really considering Monmouth one of your main crop cultivars. We're considering it as a pollinizer to add to your orchard to diversify the pollen source and while also producing a good quality nut. It has a different growth habit than Raritan. It's more wide. It's a very healthy, attractive, vigorous growing tree, but you'll see compared to Raritan, these are trees planted at the same year, that Raritan is more upright and Monmouth is wider. So what that means is you're just going to have a little bit different style orchard management with those, but you can prune Monmouth up enough to get your equipment under the trees. And just here's an example of what the in-shell nuts and the kernels look like. And then roasting them, they peel really well, and they do make it's a really high quality kernel that comes from Monmouth. So an important component of your orchard mix. The last tree that I'll talk about specifically, some of you may be familiar with, is uh, OSU 54114. It should say 147. I have a typo there. The Beast hybrid hazelnut. And this was developed at Oregon State University. And it didn't quite make the cut there as a production cultivar because they have so many really excellent options. Uh, but they sent it to us at Rutgers probably around the year 2000. And we found that it's highly Eastern filbert blight resistant and also highly productive under our conditions. And this is a hybrid hazelnut. It's related to Corylus americana rush. So roughly speaking, it's about 25% American hazelnut, which probably lends it to its you know qualities as being widely adapted. I won't say that it's more cold hardy than a pure European hazelnut. We haven't proven that yet, but I know there's growers in zone 5 that are growing it and starting to get some nut production. It was nicknamed the Beast as it was really the most vigorous and productive plant in the early Rutgers trials. Uh, Early on, when we started the program, we collaborated right away with Oregon State University and Sean Mellenbacher, who you can see in the picture there. And they sent us not only seed populations, but also clonal material of things to test. And a lot of the material they sent did die because we have a different strain of the pathogen here, the Eastern filbert blight pathogen. But the beast was one that really stood up, and we found that it was quite productive. The nut quality isn't as good as Raritan or Somerset or Monmouth. It still makes a nice kernel, but it's not quite at the level. So we consider this a pollinizer. And fortunately, it has the S8 pollen allele, and it blooms early to mid-season, which means it blooms at the time the female flowers of Raritan, Somerset, and Monmouth have already been exerted from the plant. So it's really a perfect pollinizer or one to add to the mix of pollinizers. So if you see any of our orchard designs, we include the beast as one of our main pollinizers. The thing about the beast, if you like to eat raw hazelnut kernels once they're dry, it has a ton of fiber on the kernel, so it's really not great for eating raw. But once you roast it, that fiber flakes off. So you can kind of see a picture here. I know if some of you are growing the beast and you just harvest your hazelnuts and eat them raw, you probably say, well, these are kind of small and there's just too much fiber. You know, that fiber gets stuck in your throat. But if you roast them, they actually make a nice kernel. But like I said, it's not as good as Raritan or Monmouth in terms of I wouldn't want my whole entire orchard being the beast. But if it's one of your pollinizers and you can harvest all together and size sort, it'll work. It'll work really well in production. We did a survey, just kind of moving on to kind of paint some perspective on what's been happening in terms of planting hazelnuts. In 2024, we did a survey, and we just did another survey just recently, but I don't have the results of that yet. Uh, Today, I would say about 60,000 trees have been sold of the Rutgers cultivars to date, maybe a little bit more than that, almost 65,000. Uh, 50,000 puts us at about 270 acres of trees being have been planted. I bet we're probably closer to 300 acres now, planted in the sort of northeastern region of the United States. Mostly Rutgers cultivars, but with our survey, we found, of course, Grimo and Z's Nutties included, as well as hybrid hazelnut seedling plantings. We tried to avoid in the survey or including the big populations of upper Midwest hybrid hazelnuts, sort of a different category. But if we look at a summary here of this concentrated area in New Jersey, Pennsylvania, New York, and Ohio, you can see that that's gets us closer to 200 acres. I would say if this was updated to today's figures. Pennsylvania alone has about 30 acres planted. So that's pretty considerable and an indication of growing. I kind of like this slide because it shows opportunities or potential for expansion. You can see sort of the cluster in New Jersey and southeastern Pennsylvania. But as you go across the eastern half of the United States here, you can see where growers are planting trees, or these are sort of our early adopters. I should mention that most of these orchards are only 1 to 5 acres. They're on the smaller side, but there are some within this mix that are 5 to 10 acres or even larger, especially if you go into southern Ontario. So shifting gears just a little bit here, the breeding is continuing, and you may have heard that we're releasing some new cultivars. And in fact, we're just about ready to get them out. I think some will be for sale formally or officially in 2026. We may have shared some of these with some of you for testing, but not yet for commercial sale. Uh, we have resistance also focused on quantitative resistance and that Rotoli gene that you would see in Somerset. The main reason we're releasing new cultivars so soon is because we found that we really need to diversify the pollen sources in your orchard while also keeping the plants at very high quality for kernels and for production levels, and then also for orchard designs. The plants that we're releasing show consistent high yields, of course, with kernel quality. What we're looking for here are round kernels that blanch well and essentially fall within the same timing as Raritan. So that's really what's important here to have similar maturity. So when you harvest your orchards, that you can do this kind of in a more concentrated period of time. I don't have the names of the cultivars listed here. These will be patent protected, so I have to be a little bit careful about the information I share uh, on those plants in a sort of public forum. But what we're trying to do is release clones, or what we're planning to do is clones that have compatible S alleles, but that cross across each other within the orchard. So the idea is that we have overlap in pollen. So if you have, for example, a really weird climate event and only one of your pollinizers has a really big catkin load or a big pollen load, it's going to have a really positive impact for your orchard. So what we're trying to do is diversify the sources of pollen in your orchard to give you a boost when we have like a really warm spell, for example, in December, followed by really cold weather in January, or January warm spell followed by a very cold in February. That can impact the catkins of the plants, of course. So we can diversify the cultivars within your orchard that have different S alleles and timing. We can give you a more robust system. So we're working on the plant patents. Foggy Bottom should have some of these plants for sale in the fall of 2026. Um, of course, I have the name sort of abbreviated here, but you can see if we have Raritan as our main production tree, which could potentially be up to 70% of your orchard based on the quality and the high yields that we're getting off of Raritan. So the 30% remaining could be made up of this list of cultivars. And you can see Monmouth with S1, S12, the Beast with S8. We have two new cultivars with S2. We have one with S12. We have one with S10 and Grand Traverse included with S25. Uh, that means that all of these partners essentially can cross with each other and they cross with Raritan. And then you have to remember that Raritan's producing a lot of pollen also of the S3 type of pollen. That means your orchard is essentially bathed in Raritan pollen. So all of these plants are going to have a really serious amount of pollen to really boost production. So besides Eastern filbert blight, I should say that the next limiting factor, assuming you're in the correct growing zone, say zone 6, zone 7, the next limiting factor is really the pollen cloud on your farm. And if you have a limited amount of varieties or cultivars in your orchard, and you have a really strange weather event, and the timing, maybe it's not even frost damage, it's just the timing is off of bloom, you can have reduced yields. So on our research farm, we have thousands of plants and really wide overlap of compatibility. So we do see the highest yields based on just this really diverse pollen cloud. So what we're trying to do is help boost those opportunities for our growers, so you can have predictable plant performance with really good nut quality, but also high pollen cloud diversity and resiliency. Uh, I'm not going to get into the orchard layout, and if anyone is thinking about putting in a considerable planting, say 1 acre, 2 acres, 5 acres, I invite you to just please reach out to us at Rutgers, and we can help give our most updated recommendations in terms of orchard layout, especially as the new cultivars come online. Uh, so do your homework, and before you move forward with any substantial plantings, just make sure you have a good plan in place in terms of what to include in the orchard. And you can even leave open spaces or rows or replace trees that have died. Say you are already planted an orchard, just to boost pollen and to diversify the cultivars within the collection. Uh, I'm going to try to go through the next step a little bit quick, so if we have time, so we have some time for some questions. But as we're seeing, a number of our growers, especially in New Jersey, that maybe got started 3 or 4 or 5 years ago, their trees are coming into production. And then one of the next steps is, well, how am I going to harvest these nuts? And what we find is you'll have 1 year of kind of, medium harvest loads, and you can do it by hand. And then the next year, it increases exponentially. And it can overwhelm your capacity in terms of what you can do with just hand tools. So at Rutgers, we've been trying over the past 10 years to accumulate funds and buy equipment that's available for hazelnuts. So we can test it out, we can use it, demonstrate it, and then share our notes on what equipment works and what doesn't. So for the rest of my presentation, for the next 15 minutes or so, I'm going to run through harvesting and processing hazelnuts on the small farm and show some of the equipment. Maybe some of you are familiar with some of this equipment already. If not, it'll kind of give you a glimpse into what's available. And of course, you can reach out to me and we can share more detailed notes on the costs of the equipment and where to purchase them and pros and cons, things like that. So if you're new to hazelnuts, it's important to realize that the nuts fall from the tree starting in late August, all the way through early October. So depending on what hazelnuts you have planted, you can see a pretty wide range. Part of the target for our new cultivars is that they fall within this 2 to 3 week range altogether. Wait, they can be really early, they can be really late in terms of what you plant, but having it in a more targeted zone, of course, facilitates harvest. So, what will you do in your orchard prior to nut fall? It's really important, especially if you want to have an efficient harvest, is to clean the orchard floor of debris, mow the roadways short to facilitate the harvest. So, this is what we do at the farm starting in early August. We start to really go into really good weed control, mowing, and cleanup, picking up sticks, blowing out all the debris. So, we want to try to get rid of as much as we possibly can within the orchard to facilitate our harvest. So you can use a variety of blowers to remove leaves and sticks, old nuts, things like that. We do use herbicides to create weed-free strips under the trees. So in early August, we'll go through and do some of our sprays and try to get rid of the weed populations that may be existing under the trees just to really facilitate harvest. Uh, Mulch is very helpful, and I strongly suggest you use mulch on your young trees, but it can interfere with harvest, especially if you use really coarse mulch, like say wood chips that are large chips that take many years to break down. So if you're getting close to bearing age and you're going to be using any variety of equipment for helping with harvest, it's important to look for a fine mulch, like a composted bark mulch that knits together over the season. So put it down in the spring. By harvest time, the finer mulches start to break down a bit and knit together, and then you can blow the nuts off the mulch. We've used, without really thinking ahead, we've used some really coarse wood chip sort of mulch, from tree prunings and chippers, and we find that can clog a lot of our harvest machines. So we try not to do that where we can. But I do advocate strongly for mulch. We'll see if this video works. Just to put it in perspective, you can see here the nuts of these European hazelnuts, the Rutgers cultivars, and particularly they're selected to fall naturally to the ground in September. So if the video is playing okay, you'll see that the ground is just covered with nuts, but they're very spaced out. So of course, an important part is going to be to try to consolidate those nuts uh, as easy as possible, so to facilitate picking them up. So this is the exciting time of the year. The nuts start to fall. Uh, just keep in mind that they do fall over a 2 to 3 week period. So you're going to have to do, in many cases, multiple harvests. On our acreage, we probably harvest about 3 or 4 times. Uh, we, in theory, you could leave the nuts drop on the ground, leave them sit there. But if it rains, you're increasing the chances of molds. And on our farm, the longer we let nuts sit on the ground, it's more likely that some sort of critter, rodent, uh, fox, blue jays are going to come take those nuts. So we like to harvest multiple times. So where you can do that, of course, uh, that's what we suggest. Um, we use blowing or sweeping the nuts, and I'll show some of those approaches 2 or 3 times over the harvest season. So we'll go through and consolidate the nuts, harvest, more nuts will fall, we'll go through and consolidate them, and then do it again. So for consolidation, you can use rakes, you can use handheld or backpack leaf blowers, gas or electric. You could use push blowers. as you increase in scale, tractor mounted blowers, and various sweepers. But you can see from the pictures here what we're trying to do. And I'm going to talk about two different approaches that we use over the growing season, but are to consolidate those nuts just to make it easier to pick them up. So leaf blowers are a big part of that, at least on the scale that we're doing, which is about, I would say, close to 10 acres of hazelnuts. As you go beyond that, that's when you move towards the tractor mounted blowers and you do less handwork and you increase the operation with machinery. This video I think is a little choppy, but it shows here's an orchard where we've consolidated the nuts into the edge between the weed-free strip and then the grass. So this takes a little bit of hand labor and sort of an art to how you blow the nuts and not just spread them all over the place. But you can see we can consolidated a row of nuts. This means that we can bring our harvest equipment through and in a short period of time, pick up those nuts. Recently, about 2 years ago, we developed a custom nut sweeper, which you can see here works to consolidate the nuts into rows. I think it spans about a 5 foot swath of the orchard floor. Um, my video here was a when we first got the machine, so there's not a lot of nuts on the ground to show it. But what it does do, it does a pretty good job of pushing the nuts into a central row. So this can get you away from using the backpack leaf blowers as much. But we found if you use it on the bare soil, the weed-free strips, it does cause a bit of erosion. So I think we have places where it works and places where it doesn't work so well, or maybe we need to replace it with something with rubber paddles. So when it comes time to harvest, here is some of the equipment you may want to use or consider using. Um, of course, you can pick them by hand, and when your trees are young and you're excited to get just a couple pounds of nuts off of each tree, you might go through and pick them by hand when they're ready. It's slow, but it works. But this also does require that step of husk removal. If you're able to let them fall to the ground, then you can rake and shovel and scoop them into bins. So there's a variety of ways, of course, you can do that. But the more debris that you pick up, then it's going to require an even greater cleaning step. And we'll talk about options there. Nut wizards, bag of nut, as you can see here, my kids when they were young uh, pushing, I think that's the bag of nut. They work well, but you really do need a clean orchard floor. So if you have sticks, if you have leaves, sometimes we get into sort of a drought situation in late August, early September, leaves start to fall. Too many leaves on the orchard floor makes these machines or these pieces of equipment not work so well. But they can be effective. And this moves us to various powered machines, which of course are more expensive, but do provide some options. I have a picture here of one piece of equipment that we tried, and we quickly realized that this is not something that we want to use, but it does exist, so I want to show it. So there is this backpack harvester that comes from Italy. It's heavy and very loud. It's prone to clogging. It needs a cleaning stage, so it's not really recommended, but it does exist. And I know in parts of Europe that these are used, and they can be effective. But my crew, me personally, would not like using this machine, partly because it's so loud and so heavy and sort of underpowered. One of the first harvesters that we were able to acquire, this is probably about 10 years ago now, was the Kiankia K500 vacuum. This definitely was faster than picking by hand. It's PTO driven, so you need a tractor, but it can be run with a pretty small tractor. Um, but we found, and I'll show the video, it's quite underpowered, although it's faster than by hand. So if you have a very small budget, and you can see here the consolidated nuts, and it does have a relatively light, but it does have a cleaning stage. So as it comes through the machine, it blows off some of the debris. You'll have to do, like, I would say, quite a bit of hand cleaning if you don't have any further steps, but it is effective. But for us, we found that it's just probably too slow. And it too, because we have a lot of small rocks in our orchard, it's prone to clogging. So the next piece of equipment that we acquired was the Savage Pecan Harvester. Uh, this we found to be very effective for hazelnut, but it works best in grassy areas, not bare soil. It has essentially rubber paddles underneath the front of the unit that flips the nuts into a collection area. They fall onto a screen, and it's able to sort of sort the nuts from sticks and other debris. So it has a little bit of a cleaning stage, and it's effective. And my crew really do like using this machine. Um, it does need a cleaning stage after, and I'll talk a little bit about that. Uh, but you're able to run this without having a tractor. So this is self-powered. You just have to have a small, something like a golf cart or a small tractor or a four-wheeler to pull it through the orchard. To use this, what we do is we blow the nuts from under the trees where we have the weed-free strips into the grassy roadways. So this picks up nuts from grass. It doesn't work really well on bare soil. Those paddles just push the nuts, and it's not very effective. So this, keep in mind, if you plan to use a Savage harvester, you do need to use it in the grassy areas. And one thing that's a benefit, and you'll see compared to some of the other equipment, it's a one-person operation. It doesn't need a tractor. Uh, the next step up from the Kiankia K500 are these larger vacuum style harvesters. These work in grass, but best with reduced vegetation. Maybe some of you have visited our farm and seen some of these pieces of equipment in person. The one that we use the most on our farm is the Hasetsan H2200 from Turkey. Uh, the challenge here, it does require a greater than 45 horsepower tractor for power. So you need a pretty powerful tractor to run it. The great thing is you can run two vacuum tubes, which I'll show in the next video. And it has a really nice cleaning stage and a dehusker included. So you get a pretty clean product that comes out of this. You can see how clean the floor is. I think my video, I timed it just a little bit too late to get I need to get a better video for this presentation, but you'll see both tubes in operation, and then you'll see the sacks of the nuts that have already been harvested and how clean the orchard floor is. And it's able to just power through quite a bit of debris. You can see it blowing out of the machine there. So we find it quite effective. And what we actually do is we use it when we use the Savage harvester early in the season. We'll collect the nuts, which come with all the debris from the field. We'll dump those out, and then we'll run them through this Turkish harvester, and that gives us a really clean product. Here's a machine that we don't have at Rutgers that I saw earlier last year on a visit to Southern Ontario, and this is on our wish list, but this costs over $50,000. This isn't running during harvest season. This was just a demonstration that the farmer showed me, but you can see here that it's sort of a combination of machines. It has a sweeper that pulls the nuts from inside the tree row, and then it has rubber fingers or paddles that throw the nuts up into a separating bin. Uh, I think that this could be quite useful, of course, as budgets allow, uh, for harvesting in our eastern orchards. So this, like I said, is on our wish list. It does have a hydraulic dump also, so you can go through your orchard and collect, quite a few hundred pounds of nuts, maybe a ton of nuts. I forget exactly what the capacity is on the machine, and then you can dump them into your bins for the next stages. Um, just to kind of go through reiterate the steps. When most of the crop is fallen, so we use the Savage to pick the nuts that we blow in the grass for maybe 2 or 3 runs. And then once it's nearing the end of harvest, we'll go to use the vacuum machines because they are more effective in terms of getting all the nuts from the orchard. So having the opportunity to have both types of machine is quite helpful. To use the vacuum harvester, now we'll go in and we'll blow the nuts out of the grassy roadways into the edges. So then that consolidates the piles, and we can go through with those vacuum tubes. The vacuum machine, some of the cons there would be it is a 3-person operation. You can maybe do it with 2 people, but 3 people are usually what we would use. So that's a little bit of a challenge in terms of labor, but the end product is very clean. Here's another machine we have on the farm that we haven't quite optimized its use yet. partly because it's a little too large for most of our orchards. We can only use it on a few of them. What this is a vacuum machine very similar to the Turkish machine, but it also has uh, a lateral harvesting attachment. So you can see the paddles there. If we consolidate the nuts into rows in the orchard, then we can use this machine to go through and sweep the nuts right up into the machine. Now we can take this attachment off of this machine and use it just like the Turkish harvester. So it's a little bit more expensive, or actually it's considerably more expensive than a Turkish harvester, but it does give you a little bit of an advantage if your orchard design is wide enough. So we use it only on occasion because we have it more for demonstration, but it doesn't really fit the farm. I'm going to go a little quick through the next steps. What's important is when you harvest the nuts from the field, of course, there's going to be debris. There's going to be sticks and stones, blank nuts, old nuts from the year before, and other things. So you do need a cleaning stage. Doing this by hand is really challenging and not quite. Once you get over 500 pounds of nuts, it really becomes time limiting. So this machine is really a key component. This is the S98 cleaner separator from Kiankia. It uses suction and airflow to remove stones, small sticks, husks, broken shells, and other debris. And what's really great about it is it actually even removes blank nuts. So hazelnuts, as you know, a certain percentage can have no kernel or be a really tiny shriveled kernel. So this machine actually can go through and remove those. Uh, the nuts go directly from the field into this cleaner. So if you have all the pieces of the puzzle uh, organized, when you harvest from the field, you can go right into this cleaner and get ready for the next stages of washing and drying. So I'll show this video here. You can see how I will say dirty these nuts are in terms of sticks and other debris. There's little pine cones because we were on the farm near some dawn redwood trees. You can see the dull colored blank nuts. This removes those stones at this stage. You can see them falling into the pan. And then they're pulled up through a suction to a vacuum into another stage at the top, which actually has a really stiff paddle that pushes all of the contents that got sucked up through a size separator. And this is where little pieces of sticks and old shells will fall out and sort of constitutes one of the sizing stages. And the next is what's really important is this aspirator, which throws the nuts into an air column and separates them by weight. And this is where the blank nuts come out and the final debris. So you can see here, as we sort of pan down into the container, how clean the nuts are. And in my next slide, you'll see a comparison. This is what goes into the machine, and this is what comes out of the machine. So it's really effective, and it really changed the game for us. The next step would be washing. And here we're using a grape tomato washer, which we found works quite well for hazelnuts. It's simply hooked to a hose. So it's an electric machine that you hook to a garden hose, and it sprays the nuts. And it also has a set of brushes that will clean the nuts at the end. So this removes any of the dirt or dust or debris on the nuts and gets them ready for drying. Uh, Another way to wash them without buying that type of equipment is to spread them out, of course, on something like a bench top and use a high-powered hose and to spray the nuts and move the nuts around and do this all by hand. And this can be really quite effective in if you have the area to do this can work well, especially if that area that you have works also for drying. Like you can see here, we have it in a plastic hoop house. We spread them out on tables. We wash them sometimes with just the hose. And this gives us washing and drying in the same place. One thing that's really important to consider with all of this, no matter how you harvest and go to the next stages, it's really important that the nuts from the field get dried right away. So they can have a high moisture content, which could be 10%, it could be 15% coming from the field. If you put them in a bulk bin, a tub or a sack with limited airflow, they're actually going to start to heat up and it's going to increase the percentage of molds. It's going to decrease the quality of the crop. So they really need to be dried right away. Start the drying process within the same day, within a day. if possible. And what we want to do is reduce that to about 4 to 5% moisture content for storage. Once they're dry, they're extremely stable, as you all know, and can last for over a year in that state. But if we don't get them dried right away, we can get a lot more molds. We use a really simple process. We spread them into thin layers. Um, you can use fans, of course. The idea here is not to have too dense of a layer of nuts. Uh, in our greenhouse setting where we probably dry about 1,500 to 2,000 pounds of nuts at a time. We go to about a 3-inch layer because we have ventilated benches, so they're drying from the bottom and the top. And we have the greenhouse fans running to move it, increase the airflow. Stirring the nuts can speed drying, especially if you're doing it on the floor. We've also done it on the floor. This is a picture from one of our greenhouses where we're able to dry about 3 or 4,000 pounds of nuts at one time. And in fact, this is how nuts are dried in Turkey. So as long as you can get them out of the rain, we do put some fans, but stirring the nuts moves those from the bottom to the top and helps with that. Um, we did purchase some commercial drying equipment. Uh, this is Italian equipment that has a 1-ton capacity, but I'm sad to say we've yet to find a place at Rutgers to install it. It's a gas-powered device, so they have some specific rules because it can't just be set outside. It has to be kept out of the rain. So there's some challenges there, but hopefully in the near future we can give some updates on how well that works. There's a variety of ways to dry hazelnuts. This is a slide I borrowed from the Upper Midwest hazelnuts where they built this forced air box dryer. So depending on the scale and the amount of nuts you're trying to dry, there's really a lot of different ways to go about doing this. The important thing is that you have to dry them and not over dry them. So there's a little bit of an art to that. For the last couple of minutes, I just want to talk about size sorting. So once you harvest the nuts, of course, even if it's a limited amount of cultivars, there's going to be variation in the sizes. And when it comes to the next step of shelling, that becomes challenging if you have all different sizes of nuts. So one thing we've invested in is a number of different pieces of equipment to allow us to do the size sorting and then subsequently the shelling. So what we do is we actually use these devices to sort them to the 1 millimeter diameter size. And I'll show you how this one machine runs here. Fortunately, some of these pieces of equipment kind of incorporate both size sorting and shelling into one unit. So as long as you have the right sizing rollers, the types of rollers, you can use them for both. So what we do is we take all those dry nuts once they're dry, and then we move them into a size sorting, and we sort them all by 1 millimeter diameter sizes. This is a machine we got about a year and a half ago. I just want to show it because it is sort of semi-commercial scale. It's not what the processes are, but it's not what's being used in Oregon on a large scale. But it's something that you could use on a moderately sized Eastern hazelnut scale. You can see the nuts go up through the conveyor, and this long roller has actually 3 different sizes, starting from the smallest to the largest diameter. And we're able to take those mixed size nuts from the field and then separate them out into these different diameters, which will then facilitate shelling, the next stages. And there is actually a 4th size, so anything that was too large to go out through those sizing rollers comes off the back end of this machine. So we're able to swap out the rollers and then size sort that size class there. This machine also doubles as a sheller. And you can see there's a big difference, or there's a difference in the type of uh, sorting roller that you'll have. If you're doing the cracking, you can just add to the rollers this half moon cutout design, which allows whole kernels to roll through, but shell pieces to fall into the bin. So you can hear the cracker, and then you have kernels, and anything that was too small to be cracked rolls through and then comes off the end of the machine. And this machine is quite convenient because it has a conveyor belt that you can return those nuts that weren't cracked to the front of the machine. The last thing here is then also sorting after the fact. Of course, if you're going to sell hazelnuts, these are ones for the in-shell market. Here's a rotating table that allows us to stand around the table, pick out any cracked nuts, any small stones, any other pieces of debris that made it through the cleaning system. We also use this for kernels. Uh, I do have a link if you're interested to download the presentation. I'll leave this here on the screen for a second. Um, on the smaller QR code is a PDF file, which will be much easier to download, but it won't have any videos. Then on the right side is the full presentation, where if you wanted to rewatch these videos or share them with anyone, it's here for you. And then just finally, and I'm sorry, I think I went close to overtime. I'm going to stop here. Just really thank you again, the Pennsylvania Nut Growers Association, for this opportunity to share what we're doing here at Rutgers. And then I'd like to thank our Rutgers Hazelnut team. Some of you probably know John Kapik and John Bombardier, but Emil Milan, Owen, Aaron, Dan, and David have been an instrumental part. And maybe you've had an opportunity to meet with some of them over the past years. So I'll stop there, and maybe there's 4 or 5 minutes for questions. I know I went a little bit over, but I'm happy to take any questions if anyone has them.
So you keep that there. I think we can do a few questions. Do we have any questions? Let me get the audio going here. Right. Check, check. Is this microphone working? Okay. All right. So if you have a question,
You have to carry it with
I
you.
think, is it working? Check, check.
It
It
was.
was for a second.
Zach, could you just come up and put, so Dr. Baldner can hear you. Scott has the microphone that's working, and
Is that?
yeah, just so he can hear you.
Hey, great presentation. I was curious with the Eastern filbert blight resistance.
It
Yeah,
is.
Can you hear
Zach,
me?
you have to
Turn-
hold it
turn
like
it-
this, like
like-
you're
yeah,
a rock
that's it.
star.
How about now?
No, like a rock star. There you go. All right.
There you
All
go.
right. I was curious about the Eastern filbert blight resistance. Where are those genes coming from? Are they coming from the Americana, or are they latent in the European genetics, or is it a combination of all the above?
That's a really great question. The question was about the resistance and particularly in the European hazelnut. So our American hazelnut, of course, evolved with the pathogen and has a lot of innate tolerance or resistance. The European hazelnut did not, uh, but we found by searching wide and far across the germplasm, the plant material available, we did find resistance within the European hazelnut, and we've been studying that resistance over quite a few years. And so we have both Raritan, Somerset, Monmouth. That's strictly European hazelnut resistance that we found kind of by chance, just screening big populations. Whereas the beast gets its resistance from the Native American hazelnut.
Anybody else, Emily?
Okay. Any other questions? Jerry has one. Can you come up and use the mic?
I'll just tell him, what does he recommend? Straight, single trunk or shrub?
The question from a member is, do you prefer single trunk or shrub form with your nuts?
Oh, great. That's a great question. I'm glad you brought it up. So what we're really leaning towards now is multiple stems, but not a free-ranging shrub. So somewhere from like 3 to 5 to 7 stems that you would prune over time but control suckers. So having those multiple stems, especially in something like Raritan or Monmouth, they are not immune to Eastern filbert blight. So you can get a small canker, and that canker can spread, and it does take a long time to kill a branch, but it may take, even if it's 4 or 5 years, if you have one single stem and the Eastern filbert blight gets into that one stem, you could lose your tree. But if you have 3 stems or if you have 5 stems, you actually have some backup there. And then also if a buck comes into your orchard and rubs it, or someone accidentally hits it with a tractor, 3 to 5 stems is really kind of ideal. And I say this now with confidence because the yields that we're getting on some of our multiple stem trees, I'll say that where suckers are controlled, it's not a free ranging shrub, they're pruned, but the yields are very, very high and not higher than the single stem trees. I think they're just about the same. So especially in a more tough situation where you may have deer or bucks rub or other things, we do like the multiple stem approach. But I'm not saying just plant it and forget it, because if you let all the suckers come in, if you don't do pruning, you're not going to be able to get your equipment under the tree and you're actually going to have lower yields. So thanks for bringing that question up. I think it's quite important.
Since they're wind pollinated, is there an ideal row spacing that is perfect for pollination but also allows equipment? Do you think like 15 feet, or is there something that you guys use?
We are really going with 18 feet between the rows right now, which is kind of gives you the balance
Yeah.
between that. 20 feet's okay too, but I think with 18 feet, you can squeeze a little bit more trees in the orchard and still be able to manage them. And then we plant at 10 feet between the trees in the row, knowing that at 10 to 15 years, you may have to do some heavy pruning or removing every other tree. And that's a whole nother topic to talk about. But 18 feet is really what when we put an orchard design together for someone, we use 18 feet now.
Thank you, Dr. Molnar. Is there any other questions? Here's another question.
Are you doing your propagation from layering or grafting, or both? What do you recommend?
Well, so in terms of propagation, there's multiple approaches. The existing cultivars like Raritan and Monmouth primarily are being produced through tissue culture or micropropagation. And then those small micropropagated plants are being raised up and sold. They're essentially like layers, but the layering process is done in a lab setting. With the new cultivars coming out, we do not have them initiated in tissue culture, so we're going to be doing traditional field layering. But we have also been doing grafting, because now we can use something like the Beast hazelnut or Raritan hazelnut as a clonal rootstock that we know is resistant or tolerant to Eastern filbert blight. So now that we can use those cultivars as rootstocks, we are using grafting. I don't think it's the long-term approach in terms of putting in production orchards. I really prefer them on their own roots through traditional layering or tissue culture. But grafting does work with hazelnuts, and some of the new cultivars for the next couple of years are going to be available through grafted plant material as we try to ramp up. Layering takes multiple years to get into commercial scale production. But thanks for that great question.
Any other questions? Oh, we got one in the back.
They put up the QR code again.
Oh,
Could you put up the QR code again?
Oh, sure. There we go. And you can always send me an email if that's not working. It is a large file download. And if you don't have my email address, if you just look at Rutgers Molnar, Rutgers Hazelnut, you'll find my webpage, and the my email's right there.
I have a question. I don't know if y'all can hear me. I was going to ask about the cultivars you went over in the beginning. If you have different recommendations that are easy to make here for people growing these hazels in different contexts. So if you're growing them at really a homestead scale versus kind of cottage industry scale, how those recommendations might differ, if at all?
Oh, that's a great question. So if you're growing just a small number of the hazelnuts in like a backyard planting where maybe you only have 5 or 10 trees, I think it's really important to diversify the mix of plants. I still think Raritan is going to be one of your key producers, but I wouldn't have, 7 Raritan and then 4 other cultivars or 5 other cultivars, something like that. I would try to really diversify on that smaller scale. The pollen cloud, it's not less robust, and so I would say go with a really diverse planting and try to incorporate as many of the cultivars as you can. As you scale up, like I said, if you're looking to do an acre or more, we can provide some guidance, at least what we recommend in terms of incorporating the cultivars. But what's really important is that, say if Raritan is your major producing cultivar, and you're using an 18 or 20-foot spacing, right now what we're really looking at is you can have 2 rows of Raritan adjacent, but then on the opposite side, so the outer rows of those 2 rows of Raritan, you really want to incorporate diverse pollinizer rows. If you go to 3 rows of Raritan and you have less pollen, especially in the younger orchards when the trees are small, and that's where I think we'll see things will come together when they're 10, 12 years old and the pollen cloud is large. But when the trees are small, if you have 3 rows of Raritan and not a lot of pollinizers, that middle row is going to have a very significantly reduced crop until those trees are 7, 8, 9 years old. Some of our early planted orchards, our farmers we visit, and we can see, well, here's a beech tree and it's surrounded by Raritan, and you can see the crops fade as you get, up farther than 20 or 30 feet from those beech trees. This is on the small orchard where the trees are only 3 or 4 years old. So what's really important is to think about those pollinizer rows and incorporating within the production rows and then having their own rows. And that's why we're moving quickly with some new cultivars. Not that we haven't evaluated them for a long time, but we're getting them out there. So those, what we would call pollinizer rows, could be made of really, really good high yielding plants with good quality nuts. Instead of previous designs we may have shared were to incorporate like hybrid hazelnut seedlings into pollinizer rows. But we find that the yields are too low. There's chance for eastern filbert blight, increasing pressure in your orchard, and the quality of the nuts is quite variable. So I hope does that help a little bit?
It does, yeah. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Yeah, so my question really is about allergy and hazelnuts and nut allergies, and how, when you're talking to people about the value of hazelnuts, if that's something that's worth bringing up.
Well, allergy to the nut itself or to the pollen? That's the two sides.
Well, either, a lot of windblown pollen people are allergic to.
So hazelnut pollen is a considerable allergen. It's if you work in hazelnut for quite a few years, or if say you have your own hazelnut orchard, you'll probably have an increasing reaction to the pollen. In terms of, we really haven't crossed over into that question in terms of what happens in the public setting. In February and March when a hazelnut farm is increasing the allergen load in the air. I'm not really sure the best way to approach that. It's in a finite time of the year, and it's usually in the winter when less people are outdoors. So maybe it's not going to be as big of a concern. But I think if you live downwind from a large hazelnut orchard, you may suffer a bit from the allergy that comes from the pollen. The nut side of it, it's a well-known allergen. I did have one grower that hosts like fall festivals, and they do like cider apple donuts and wine tastings and all these things. And he was concerned, and he said, well, I really love the idea of hazelnuts, and I think they would be a big seller, but I don't really want to bring a roasted nut product into my fall festival season just for the allergy reason. But I've had others that have been really excited over the idea and doing something like fresh roasted chestnuts and fresh roasted hazelnuts together in their fall festival setting, and imagining they would have some really good sales. So I don't really know exactly, there's going to be some challenges there potentially, but maybe the pros outweigh the cons, or there could be just good signage and like these, stay away from the area of the festival that's roasting hazelnuts if you're allergic. But I'm not sure if that answered your question very well, but there are definitely things to consider as this moves forward.
Robbie Coville chimed in to use windbreaks for the tree pollen. So maybe in your design, remembering, that enter.
All right,
I think
good.
that's a great idea, and that would help the orchards too, I think. engineers.
Hey,
Well, thank you everyone for your time today.
thank Dr. Molnar.
Bravo. Thank you very much. Oh, cool. We get a clapping
We're
icon.
going to try to have a link on the PNGA website to this recorded presentation. So we're going to try. I haven't promised, but I think we can do that. So I think we can say goodbye to the folks on Zoom.
Walk
Thanks
over
All right,
again.
thank you.
And
Thank you, everyone.